G'day guys, No Duff here again today, and what I'm going to show you now is how to quickly iron your uniform so that it's highly presentable. Ironing board selection is the first thing you want to think about. Go out and buy a cheap ironing board. It doesn't have to be a really expensive, good one, because pretty much what you're paying for is a good ironing board cover. One's a little bit cushiony in that, so don't worry about it. Get a nice, good height ironing board, nice and rigid. It doesn't have to be expensive, just a cheap one. Cheap cover, doesn't matter. To get that effect, just place a towel underneath and then wrap your cover back over the top. You can get a full length towel or you can just go a short one. Doesn't matter, just make sure you don't iron over the crease if you only have a short one. I only have this one up here for the collar and stuff because the rest of this isn't too bad. This is still pretty, still got a bit of cushioning into it, because if you don't have that cushioning, when you iron, you'll get the effect of all the wiring underneath and that'll transfer across into your uniform afterwards. So ironing board selection number one. The second thing is you want to make sure you have a good starch. Crisp is generally your best way to go. It's the cheapest and probably the most, sorry, it's not the cheapest, but it's probably the most popular one out there, but it is definitely good to go. When you do use it, don't oversaturate. I mean, don't soak the fabric, just enough to cover the top and wipe with your hand, but you'll see that in a second. For locker inspection, say if you're at Kapuka or your IETs, get those green scourers that you use to clean the dishes, cut them down to size and put them in your sleeve pockets that go in your arm, because that'll help, keep it nice and flat when it's being presented in your locker. Another thing as well, don't worry too much about your pants. They don't generally get looked at, especially in an inspection. If they're hung up correctly, they won't be seen anyway, so use your time effectively because you don't get much time to iron your uniform, so don't waste your time on your pants. But saying that, when you do hang up your pants for inspection, what you do is grab your pants, put them together at the front, pinch them across, pull out that flimsy bit at the back, and hang them down. Now grab the coat hanger, drag them in, roughly in the center, make sure it's nice and flat, and pull your coat hanger up. And then all you have to do is pull it so it's even, and there you go. Now as you can see, it's relatively sort of puffed up, so what you want to do, this is only optional, iron pants just very gently so that they become a bit more flatter on the actual coat hanger. Another tip guys, never iron your uniform if you're wearing it. Just don't do it. Alright, so now as you can see, that's a little bit more flatter, so when you hang that up with your shirt, it's going to look nice and crisp. Right, let's get onto the shirt. First thing you want to do guys is make sure you remove all your embellishments, being your patches, rank slides, all that stuff, get rid of it. Once you've done that, undo all your buttons, so then your pockets, undo any Velcro being on your sleeves where your wrists are, make sure that's all undone so it's just a bare clean shirt. Now the second thing you want to do to start this ironing, make sure your iron is on high heat, max setting. Now this won't burn your uniform, but what we will do is just pass over it quickly so that you get a nice crisp look. So like I said, first thing you want to do, iron the back of your collar, just so it's nice and flat, so that you get all the creases out of it. Once that's done, leave that, we'll come back to that later. Now, next thing you want to do is iron your pockets. So starting on the sleeves, this is the pockets of the sleeves. You can, if you want, to add starch to that, however it doesn't really matter, so I wouldn't really go wasting your starch on this because you won't be able to tell anyway if it's underneath, but I'll do it for demonstration purposes anyway. Spray it on, give it a quick wipe, and literally just dry it with the iron. Now what you want to do here for the sleeves, because we don't iron creases into the other side of the sleeves, we want to iron down nice and crisp along the seam. So to do that, you want to iron flat on this pocket, right? So how we do that is by grabbing at the end of the sleeve where you've undone your Velcro, you'll see that it's now flat on both sides, being also flat at the pocket at the top. Lay that down and pull it across your ironing board like this. There we go. The trick here is keep the pocket open and feel underneath the shirt for any creases that may have formed, and just push them out with your hands. That way you know it's flat at the bottom as well as the top. So now grabbing your iron, don't iron on the sides to make a crease. Iron in the middle and don't touch those sides, like this. Alright, so that's nice and flat now without doing the sides. As you can see, there's still a little bit raised, but that's good because we don't want to create that crease along the sides of the arm. We don't do that in the Australian Army. Now, if you want as well, you can also add starch to this. Just drying it on there. I wouldn't recommend this for your everyday use uniform though, because the starch will actually crease easier. Especially on the sleeves because they move so much, so only use the starch if you're going to use it for inspection purposes. Now, that's nice and flat on the outside, but what about the underneath? As you can see, it's relatively flat, but there's one crease I missed because I didn't pull it out correctly. But that doesn't really matter because that doesn't really get seen anyway. But if you're really concerned about it, just repeat the process, pulling it nice and taut, and just giving that a nice iron out. And there you have it, see? Nice on both sides. Go ahead and do the buttons up. And then put that shoulder into the end of your ironing board. Make that nice and flat at the top of the shoulder. And iron that flat at the top of the pocket as well. And that is one sleeve done. As you can see, that's sitting pretty flat as it is, even without the scour in there. Once you add that in there, that'll be pretty much perfect. So just here, I'm repeating the process on the other side, just without the starch. Just another tip, guys, when you're using your iron, do apply a bit of pressure when you're pushing down with the iron. Don't sort of just let it sit and glide over it. You want to put that little bit of pressure so that you do get a crisper and firmer press, essentially, on the fabric. Alright, now that both the sleeves are done, I'm going to move on to the main part of the shirt. First thing you want to do is stretch it over, sort of wriggle it over the ironing board as much as you can. Don't worry too much if the top half isn't going to be able to reach by the iron at this stage. You want to sort of focus between this middle part of the shirt, being the end of the pocket and the end of the shirt. You want to try and get that crease, that seam over the edge of the ironing board, because you want to iron it flat on both sides of that, and you'll see what I mean in a sec. So once you do that, just pulling it nice and taut, making sure you're going to be ironing it flat. See how I'm pulling it tight here, guys? That's to sort of drag out the creases so it doesn't iron the creases in. You want to be ironing it as flat out as you can. Now, as you can see, I'm going along the seam here. I'm going on either side of the seam to help get out those nasty little ripples that sometimes you get on the inside of your canvas. Now, once you've done that bottom half side, drag it a little bit further across. Once again, trying to get that arm sleeve in there too, the arm seam. Pulling it tight and ironing across. Now with the zip, don't iron over the zip because you'll get a white mark that'll appear over the top. So iron around it using the tip of your iron. Same goes for buttons. Don't iron over any buttons because they'll show through on the other side. Once again, repeating the process for the upper part of the shirt, trying to go over that seam, get out all those nasty little ripples, going over the collar area, being mindful of the zip and any buttons, and repeating the process, moving the shirt around in a methodical fashion. Once again, as I said before, keeping that seam on the other side of the ironing board so you can iron both sides. Like I said before, nice and firm, not too firm that you're pushing through the ironing board, but just firm enough that you're dragging the creases out. Moving along. As you can see here, it's almost like I'm pushing the ripples out with the iron. That way it's sort of dragging it in one direction. You're not going to get any build-up of sort of folds in that. It'll be nice and flat and even. On the back of the neck. And that's the back done. Now the last side. Same thing again, keeping that seam on the other side of the ironing board. Pressing down a little bit firm, being mindful of the buttons and the spare ones on the other side, trying to iron over those. A little bit. Rightio, now that we've done the main part of the shirt, what we're going to move on to now is the collar. Now there's a few different ways that people have been taught to do the collar. However, the way I'm going to show you is the way it looks the most natural to me and ends up looking the most even. Now the first part we want to do is iron the back of the collar. Now we've already ironed the opposite side, but what I mean here is we want to fold the collar over as if we're going to wear it, placing it over the edge of the ironing board, dragging it flat down, nice and flat, and just ironing that little back bit there. Not going any further, just that little touch there. And then leaving that, and that's it. Now, moving on to the front of the collar. Placing it sort of on a 90-degree angle to the ironing board, dragging it nice and flat. You should be maintaining a sort of similar shape from that part that you just ironed at the back. So pulling it nice and flat onto the ironing board. Once again, being mindful for any buttons underneath. Don't iron over them, iron around them. And pressing down, getting that nice, crisp fold on the collar. Now this is where you want to spend a bit of time with your starch. Once again, not to soak it, but just enough that it maintains that nice, sharp, crisp seam. So I'm just wiping off the excess here so it doesn't sort of stain and sort of shine. Now with this, you want to make sure it actually dries on. You may see that it starts to sort of shine on the stitching, but don't worry about that. It's just a good sign that it's drying properly. Rightio. There you have it. You can see that's pretty slick, pretty sharp. Good standard. Repeat the process on the other side. The reason why we do the collar last is because it's the one that's going to be noticed the most and you don't want it to move as much. Now with the other side, as I was saying before, a few different methods. One is to not have that under part showing, which is probably the most taught method because it technically shouldn't be showing, but it doesn't really matter. The way I do it is to have that little bit just showing a little bit, because you actually see that it automatically folds in a natural sort of fold there. Now when you wear your cams and you put up your buttons, it actually is even with the other side when the other side of your shirt folds over the top, so that your collar is even. It's not like that. I recommend this method. So with that little bit showing there, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but just a little bit in the corner. Once again, making sure it's nice and tight and flat. You should be able to maintain a bit of shape with that bit you iron at the back. And then just ironing over that as well. Once again, I'm just pulling a little bit on the collar on the opposite side, just to keep it a little bit flat. So just getting some heat into there. Applying some starch. And then hitting it again with the iron. And there we have it. That's the collar, being the last part done. Now all we need to do is hang it up on a coat hanger to help maintain the shape. I recommend doing up that top button just to make sure the shirt sits correctly. And as you can see there, what I meant about the collar, how it's even. If you hadn't done that, it would be a little bit shorter, like that. I don't know if you can see that. Nice and even. If you'd ironed it the other way, it would be a tiny bit shorter and it wouldn't be even. So there you have it. That's how you iron your uniform for everyday use. And there you have it. That's your uniform all nice and ironed. Once it's done and hanging on the coat hanger, that's where you can go ahead and put on your patches, your rank slides and all that kind of stuff. That way you can see that they're perfectly even with the Velcro on there. Another thing I failed to mention as well, if you have any loose threads in that are hanging off, usually it's with your new cams that you just get issued, just get a lighter and just singe them to the end. Don't actually burn your cams, but it'll get rid of those little bits. I'll do a video on how to iron your uniform when you first get it issued so that you get it right from the first time, because each additional time that you iron it, you help reinforce those creases and it'll become easier and easier to iron as time goes on. I hope this tutorial was informational and educational and you actually learn how to iron your uniform relatively quickly and use your time effectively. If you have any questions, comments, just leave them in the bottom and I'll get back to you when I can. Cheers guys.